Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you aboard the Airport Adventures, Flight 926-2020, from Philly to wherever you want to go. All carry-on items should be now stowed securely in an overhead bin or under the seat in front of you. All aisles and exitways should be clear. All electronic devices should be off or on airplane mode. As we leave the gate, please make sure your seatbelt is fastened. To fasten, insert the metal tip into the buckle and adjust the strap so it's low and tight across your lap. To release the belt, lift the top of the buckle. Remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt sign is on. Even if the sign is off, we ask that you keep the seatbelts fastened while seated in case we encounter any turbulence. Please take the time to find the closest exit to you. Keep in mind that the exits can be located behind you. Once again, we welcome you aboard the Airport Adventures, Flight 926-2020, to anywhere you want to go. And thank you for flying the Airport Adventures. Please prepare for takeoff.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. I can go anywhere. I can be anything.
I can go very high, adventure in the sky. Let your imagination take you on a ride. Now aviate your mind and soar into the sky. Let's take a look and read the book and activate your mind.
I can go anywhere. I can be anything.
I can go very high, adventure in the sky. Let your imagination take.
Hey everyone out there, thank you for joining us for another week once again on the Runway, which is brought to you by the Airport Adventure. First and foremost, I just want to apologize for the technical difficulties we've been having for the past couple of weeks. Things happen when you use equipments and stuff like that. So we're here to just really apologize for interrupting the session, but due to technical difficulties, we had to go that way. So once again, I do apologize, but that's how things go. Sometimes we plan for this and then this comes in the way. One of the things that I've learned in life is not to look at it and saying, hey, the devil is a liar or the devil did this, but it's like understanding, you know what, when you're working with certain equipments and certain technology, this is the way they go. And not only in technology, as far as friends, um, families, relationship, and stuff like that. Sometimes things come up and we have to look at it. How do we resolve it rather than cursing it? So, what we have done over the past couple of weeks, we have found out what is it that's keeping us to abruptly come off the show. So, from a technical standpoint, we have found it and then we resolve it. So, hopefully, we won't have anything like this happen in the future. But once again, I do apologize. And we're here today, and I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. You're on the runway, and the runway is the concept of where we said we wanted to create a show where we're able to bring either a person or a topic on the runway. And just like the regular airport allows the plane to take off, then that's how we're looking to either take the person off to go to a whole new destination or take the topic to a whole new destination. So far we've been working on this topic, and the topic has been around bullying. And for me, as someone who specialized in this topic, I thought it would be fitting for me to start the show with such an interesting topic that's actually affecting so many people around the world. So it's a series, and what we have done so far, we started out with the first introduction where we were basically giving people the context of how we understand bullying. from a whole different angle from what the public has taught us or brought to our awareness. So this is something, as I said, I specialize in it. And when I specialized in it back then, I was able to bring it to a whole different level. And I thought it was fitting for us to like, hey, let's start the show out and begin this topic and bring it to a whole new destination as well. So if this is your first time being on the show and listening to us, then what we're going to do, we're going to go through a run through of where we highlighted some of the things that we have brought to the table already. So, starting out, we were saying, you know what, let's give people a history of what the topic bullying is all about. Going back to the history of when you heard the first context of the word bully. So this was way back in the 1800s. And what we looked at was like, all right, let's do this. How many people understand that the word bully was never something that is categorized as the way it is categorized today? Like today in the 21st century, it's looked at as something as negative. But starting back in the 1800s, we were looking at it how a bully was either a friend or a lover to a person. So the context of what we were looking at, if so many people understand this concept that it was never something negative, then you will start to understand how can you really address the issue and resolve it in a manner where it's not plaguing us the way it's plaguing us in the 21st century as something negative. So this is one of the things that we were looking at, that we were saying, let's have a discussion around certain things and bring these things to the audience attention first before we get into what is called the solution. So with the series, we were saying, let's have the discussion before we actually give them the solutions that we found, which was something that we did, and we implemented these things and we saw a major difference in the way we were able to brought these things to the public. So looking at that, as I said, starting back in the 1800, a bully was a friend or a lover. Somewhere along the line now, just as a regular person would have a friend or a lover in their life, and then something goes wrong, then it transitioned from where this person was either a close friend or a lover to now this person is the enemy, but that person still remains with the same name. So that's how we were looking at it, that that could have been one of the reasons how it transitioned from what is called a friend to now what is called an enemy. So that's how we looked at it. But beyond that, we were also talking about it now, that understanding the concept of what is it that goes into the process of bullying. Because if you understand these things, right, then this is how you were able to better service what is it that you understand. So from that standpoint, now we were looking at it and saying, you know what, let's give them some ingredients. And we began to break down the ingredients in elements that people could understand what is the process of bullying. And the ingredients that we looked at was bullying. Bullying, which is the context of what is created in different definitions around the world, where it talks about it's an aggressive behavior. So that was one of the first ingredients that you have to look at. And this is what I found um, really interesting as we were dealing with it back then. So there were a lot of money being allocated in this context of topic, which means that many people were plagued by day, and the government started to now bring awareness in the financial field, where they were saying, you know what, let's put out this money so people could help to rectify this issue. So one thing that we found out was, listen carefully. So bullying is an act of something that's aggressive, the aggressive behavior. But there were people that were being mean to each other or being rude to each other, right? Which is not nothing around no aggression. It was just basically understanding that this person was trying to be mean or rude to someone else. But guess what happened now? Because there's a lot of money out there, then people started to categorize aggression in the context of someone being mean or rude. So you had people that were saying, oh, this person was mean to me or this person was rude to me. And they categorized that in the context of bullying, which it wasn't. But when you set up a program like that and you start to work with that context and saying, you know what, um, these children are mean to each other or they're rude to each other, so we're going to start a bullying program. Then we now started to get to the process where we're collecting money from grants and stuff like that, donations, and we're now addressing something that wasn't. Because when you talk about the context of bullying, the first ingredient is aggression, and it's an aggressive behavior that's now expelled or expunged on someone or something. So that's what we looked at. That was the first ingredient. The second ingredient is what is called a victim. So whatever is going to be expelled on the person, then what happens now, you call that the victim. And a victim, as we highlighted before, doesn't always have to be a person. A victim can be a place or an element or a thing that the person expresses these aggression on. So that was our second thing that we looked at to be in the ingredient. And then we always have what is called a bystander. A bystander, from what is categorized by the public, is someone who is actually standing around and seeing what's going on. But we also brought that to a whole nother level because we started to talk about what is called the universal bystander, meaning that the universe is always standing by and seeing what's going on. Some people equate this as karma. Some people say, hey, what goes around comes around, meaning that if you're considered that bully and you're going around bullying people, then something is coming around for you. Or from that karmatic standpoint, something is going to happen to you. So we looked at that from that context, as well as saying that the bystander is not only just the person, there's a universal bystander as well. So those were three ingredients that we found fitting. And the final ingredient that we added was we considered it a process. And the process means it starts somewhere and it ends somewhere, meaning that whenever there's the process of bullying taking place, it's not going to last forever. So there's a time that it's going to start and there's a time that it's going to stop. So these were things that we looked at and we said, you know what? These are the things that we considered the ingredients of the process of bullying. So if you understand the concept of what goes in it, then you could actually understand now how can you diffuse it. So one of the things that we did now was we actually looked at something else that we were saying, all right, if we knew that all these ingredients went into the process, then how could we analyze this now into an analogy? And what I found fitting back then was to put it into what we call a game of ping pong, where we were saying, all right, the bully is going to be on one side and the victim is going to be on the other side, which these are just two individuals standing on different side of what we would call the ping pong table. The ping pong table would now represent the environment, whether it's in the school, in the playground, in the church, in the home. That's how we looked at it. If you're playing ping pong, then there's what is called a net. And we looked at that and analyzed it as, you know what, the net is going to be the trigger, meaning that when the ball goes over the net, it engages the other person to hit the ball over on the other side. So that's now what continues the process of bullying by having the ball going over that net. So what we were saying, if anyone knows the context of playing ping pong, when you make a serve from one side of the table, if that ball doesn't go over the net, then it doesn't equate for the other person to get engaged. So we looked at that and saying, you know what? It's only when the ball goes over the net, meaning that there has to be something that trigger the person within that context of what we would call the bully, trigger the person, and that line is crossed. And then what happened now? It spills over to the other side, which is the victim. So that's how we looked at that. And then when we looked at it from that standpoint, now we were saying, all right, what is it that's causing the two of them to engage? And we looked at it, it was the ball. So that's how we said, all right, the ball is considered bullying, meaning that when these two individuals that are on separate end of the table began now to go through the process of hitting the ball over back and forth to each other, then it causes what is called now the game of ping pong, or what we would call the process of bullying. So understanding this now, we were looking at it from the context, going back to the ingredients. Now, if you understand all the ingredients that are placed into this process of bullying, then what happens now, you can know what ingredients you would want to take out to diffuse that process. So within the game of ping pong now, what we did was look at it and say, all right, if it's the ball that's causing both of them to engage, then what we would do, we would take away the ball. And that's literally what we did when we were actually going into the schools or different environment and teaching these process. We actually brought the ping pong table and we allowed students to come up and play ping pong. And once they were playing the ping pong, now what we did, we extracted the ball out of the equation and neither of them could continue playing the game anymore. And that's how we looked at it, that when you're having someone that's in a predicament of the process of bullying, you have to find what is it that's causing both individuals to engage with each other. And once you pull that away, then what happens now, there's no more what we would call the process of bullying taking place. So those were things that we utilized once we were in that process of getting people to have a better understanding. We start about we thought about the concept of what we would call the ingredients, and then we analyzed it in the concept of an analogy where we were saying, let's play ping pong and get people to better understand the concept. So this was something that we were looking at, and this is what we've been talking about in the previous shows. So we can give you an update we are right now. That today we wanted to actually talk about the process of different solutions that we saw that were applicable when we did this process back then. So that's something that we're looking at where we said, hey, we want to talk about some solutions today. But for us to talk about some solutions, we had to give you that process of bullying so you can really understand it and understand it in a way that you yourself can actually diffuse it and not have it continue to be in a process where it's devastated to so many people in today's society. So beyond that now, if we were looking at it from a context of saying, you know what, the ball is the process, is what caused the process of bullying to take place. And that ball now representing the process of bullying, we're looking at it and saying, how did that ball get there? And when we started to look at that now, we started to look at it because of the game now you involve what is called a ball. Who serviced the ball first? The bully. So if the bully serviced the ball first, then what you're looking at now, what would cause the bully to service such ball? So if you go back to it now and understand that what is called the process of bullying or bullying, which the definition is around the context of saying this is something that is expressed in an aggressive behavior, then now what you would have to do, you have to look at the context of behaviors. So what we did back then, we started to look at it from a behavior standpoint that in order for us to really understand and really diffuse this process, we have to now look at it from the aggressive behavior. So back then, how I got into this process, I had a friend of mine who had a son which was a bully at that time. And the person knew what I did in the community. So the person actually called me, hey, could you come and talk to my son about this process of what he's going through and bullying others? And just like any big brother or mentor in the community, you would actually go and give this person the motivational speech. So that's what I did. And for that, it took a toll on the person the moment I was talking to the person, but the moment I left, the person went back to do the same thing. So when I look at that, I was like, wow, you can't talk to someone about it. And it just magically disappeared. So what happens from there now, I started to really dissect it and research it and understand it from a whole different level. And that's how I realized that when someone is expressing some type of aggressive behavior, you can't just go and tell the person to stop and the person is actually going to stop. So from there now, I started to get a better understanding that once it's a context of what you would call an aggressive behavior, right? There were steps that led to that aggression. And when we started to look at that step now that we looked at and said, you know what? If it's a step in stone, then how did they get to aggression? Then you have to understand the what is called the context of behaviors. And the context of behaviors is around the context that to say that it starts out with what is called the passive behavior. When that is not addressed, then it goes on to what is called the assertive behavior. If that is not addressed, then it goes on to what is called the final step, which is the aggressive behavior. So the process of bullying, which actually takes place when aggression, there's an aggressive behavior being now demonstrated by the bully, that means the person endured some type of passive thing in their life that wasn't rectified. It went to the next level, which was assertive, and that wasn't rectified either. And then it led into a buildup of where this person is walking around with this aggression inside of them. Going back to the ping pong table now and realizing that the net is the trigger, right? So somewhere along the line now, what happened with that person walking around with this built up aggression, something in the environment, which is the ping pong table, we utilize that as the environment, but it would be like the environment of the school or the home or the church or the mosque or different religious setting or even the library, the playground. Different settings of what is called an environment that the person would go in. And this now would cause what is called a trigger reaction. So the triggered reaction now allows this aggression to come out. And let me give you just a plain example. If you purchase a regular soda in a can and you begin to shake up that soda, right? It moves from just the passive soda that's inside the can to go to the level of what you would call assertive. And the more you shake that can, it's the more it will build up in what we would call aggression. At some particular time, if you decided to now open up that can of soda, then what would come out is that aggression, which is because you shook it up for so long. Now it's built up, and as soon as you open up the can, then here comes the splitting, the splashing of the soda into your face or into the face of someone. And that's how we looked at bullying. That this person is walking around with this aggression, and it's only a matter of time before something actually triggers the person. And then what happens now, the person now brings this out, which is called the aggressive behavior, brings it out onto the victim. So these were things that we were looking at. For you to really understand the concept of bullying, you have to now understand the levels of behaviors. And when you understand that, now you'll realize that you can't just go around and tell people to stop bullying. It is something that you have to understand from the levels of how this created the process of where it moved from passive to assertive to now aggressive, meaning that it could be a couple months that this was built up or a couple of years that this took to build up to that aggression. So going to talk to someone and just telling someone, hey, I need you to stop doing this, that won't work. And I've seen it over and over again. So, in the context of understanding this, now you have to look at it. How do you get to the level of where you can understand the behavior and understand what is it that you can actually do to help to diffuse the behavior from being exhibited in the bully, so it doesn't go into the other part of the table, which if we're playing ping pong, it's going on the other side, right, to now impact the victim. So this was something that we found interesting as we were dealing with this matter at hand, where we're saying, hey, let's bring these awareness to the public. And if you understand it from a better understanding, then you can actually help to diffuse the matter. So the things that we looked at now was like, all right, how do people get to that level where they can start to deal with these level of behavior that actually is impacting not only just the what is called the bully, but also the victim or even the bystander and the overall society. As I said earlier, the government had to start getting involved where it was becoming too much for a public setting, because there are times that people got bullied and they couldn't deal with it, and it went into what is called a suicide motion, meaning that the victim now created suicide. And that was actually going on a lot. So not only did it impact the schools that it was happening at, it also started to impact the community or the overall society. So it's a huge issue. And when I looked at it, the more we understand it, the better we're able to rectify. So if you're out there and you're listening, one of the things that we found fitting as we're going into what is called a solution session now, one of the things that we found fitting was if you didn't understand it to a certain level, right? One thing that you could have done or can do right now is to reach out to someone who understands. So one of the things that we looked at was there is actually a suicide hotline for those who have been bullied or even going through any other type of problematic situation that you're not able to understand. So for us, what we looked at, if you don't understand how to diffuse it, the first thing you have to do is to get someone who understands it. So that's the first context of dealing with any problem within a circumstance, not just bullying, because you're looking at it. If you don't understand what this thing is, then what you have to do is like you bring in what is called the expert. So that's the first thing that we found viable. That if you're out there and you're listening, your child or you as an individual is going through this process and you don't understand how to resolve it, the first thing that you need to do is to reach out to someone that you think have some type of expertise in that topic to really address it. Too often people just get up and say, you know what, I could fix this, I could fix this. But what happens at that particular moment, it just makes the circumstance become worse. So this is one of the first solutions that we found fitting, that the moment you're dealing with this topic, whether it's bullying or other topics out there, the first thing you have to look at, if you don't understand it, then what you have to do is to find someone else who understands it and help that person into an understanding of what's going on with you and what is it that you need to get out of that circumstance. So this is one of the first thing that we looked at. um, if it's to the case where you're dealing with someone and they're in what is called suicide ideation, meaning that they are having suicidal thoughts, one of the things that you can do, you can call the suicide hotline, which that number is 1-800-273-8255, depending on where you are in the world. But over here in America, this is where you would actually call the 1-800 number. And again, that number is 1-800-273-8255. 273-8255. And I also know that they have a Spanish hotline as well, meaning that this has become such a big problem that they no longer offer it in just English. So the Spanish hotline that I know that was available at the time is 1-888-628-9455. Once again, 1-888-628-9454. So again, if you're out there and you're listening and you're dealing not only just with bullying, right? Anything that you're dealing with and you don't have a grasp of how to handle it, the first thing you have to do is to get the expert who understand this concept. You bring them in, you allow them to understand what you're going through and where is it that you need to go and how could their expertise now be applied to your circumstance. So this is one of the first thing that we saw that was fitting as a solution. I'm going to walk you through another 6 steps as far as what we saw that worked for us, right? So the first one was bringing in an expert or someone who is aware more than you about the problem that you're facing, right? So that's number one. Number two, we were looking at it now. Many people would go into this circumstance where they view the bully as someone who is negative or someone who is bad, right? And the moment you begin to view someone who is bad or negative, then it's the moment you actually view that person and your action now starts to now go with the way you view the person. So beyond the bullying context as well, right? This is applicable to any relationship. The way you view someone, that's the way you're going to treat them. So when we looked at it from the bully concept, we never looked at this person as someone was bad. Remember, we had the context that knew that back in the 1800, this was a lover or a friend, not as a negative person that we see today. So our view of how we dealt with the bully was totally different than how other people would go in and say, oh, this is a negative person. No, this is someone who is just experiencing that high level of aggression inside them. And what happens now at some point of walking around with this high level of aggression, something is going to trigger you for it to come out. Perfect example. Let me show you this. Whenever you drink too much water, right? At some point, something is going to trigger you for you to go to the bathroom and urinate because there's too much water inside of you. That's how the body is. So automatically, anything that's too much inside of you, what's going to happen? The body is going to find a way to excrete it. So having too much aggression inside of you, there's only a matter of time before that aggression is going to be excreted by the body because it's too overwhelming for the body. So when we looked at that, we were saying this wasn't a person that was bad. This was a person that was now walking around with some type of level of aggression inside of them. And it's only a matter of time before they would now go into what is called the excretion mode and excrete it on someone else. So that's how we looked at it. So the way we looked at that person, right, is the way we treated that person. That means that we didn't go in and say, oh, you're bad, you're evil, you're mean, you're this gangster that's beating up. No, we view the person from a totally different angle. And when we went in now, we were now seen as the person who was looking at this person as someone who their emotional context was built up into this aggression. So we didn't look at that person as bad or evil, right? We looked at someone who needed emotional help. So when someone needs emotional help, it's for us now to find an outlet to give that person the emotional help that they need. So this is what we looked at from that context. So the first one that we highlighted was what? getting the expert to come in and deal with this circumstance. The second one now is understanding the way you view someone is basically how you're going to treat that person. And beyond the context of bullying, you can look at that for any relationship that you're in. And the way you view that person, that's directly how you're going to treat that person. So that was one of the things that we found fitting, that we weren't going into these schools or these churches or different environments to talk about someone being bad or someone being evil or someone being gangster. We were going in and saying, you know what, this person is having an emotional built up process. How could we now lower or de escalate that emotion so it goes back down? So that's something that we were looking at. So those are two solutions that we found fitting. A third solution that we found fitting was understanding how did this person build up that emotional aggression into that level. And we started to understand that there are things that are called physiological needs. Physiological needs are things like love, care, support, attention, um, space, food, stuff like that that you need from a physiological standpoint, right? We found out that when these things were missing, and so many people could attribute these to what is called the parent factor. So they would say, oh, because that person is missing the father or the mother or some type of parent in their life, then what happened? They become this person that's going out there now that's beating up on other people. We understood that concept. So it's not just saying, oh, this person is not having their parents in their life, and this is what helped to build up the behavior, right, into that aggression. We realized that something was missing from the person's life. And we attribute that to what is called the physiological needs. So, what we would do now when we go into the schools or different environments, we would go in there, remember how we view the person, right? We would go in there now being that loving entity, that caring entity, that supporting entity, right? That was now addressing that physiological need that was missing out of the person. So this is one thing that we realize, that, hey, when something is missing from, it's like the core of who you are. For instance, if you say, hey, I didn't have a dad in my life, or I didn't have a mom in my life, that's the core of who you're supposed to be with that extra person in your life. And when you don't have that, then something becomes missing. That emptiness that's now in that space, right? It's going to be filled with some type of feeling. So, how do you feel around not having like someone care about you, someone love you, someone giving you that support that you would actually need? So, what happens now? How you begin to feel about these things now, it begins to build up emotionally. So emotionally, it will move from what is called passive. Oh, that person was in my life for 1, 2, 3 months or a couple months, right? Then it moved away now to the next level, like assertive. Oh, that person hasn't been in my life for now 2, 3 years. And then it moved on to now further. Oh, that person hasn't been in my life for 5, 10 years. So when you look at this now, you're looking at it how it transitioned from what is called the passive missing element to now exhibiting that aggression inside the person. So that's how we looked at that. That when something is missing, there's a missing element of love or care or support or attention, right? These things now start to build up emotionally for the person. And it's only a matter of time before it reaches to the level of what is called the aggressive state. And if it's in the aggressive state, then it's only a matter of time before the body begins that process, which is called excretion, because it's too much for the body to deal with. So that was the third thing that we found as solution. Another solution that we found, and I remember this, I was dealing with a group of students, and this was the topic that we were talking about bullying. And I began to now walk them through a process called destination. And the destination for us was looking at it and saying to them, now, imagine if I got you to your destination. Do you think you would have time to actually sit here and bully someone? And I started to break down the destination now into what is it that they wanted to become. Some of them were like, hey, I wanted to become a football player or a basketball player or some type of activity in where they would look at themselves later on as being professional in that activity. And when we realized now, they were like, oh no, if I got to play football or basketball or whatever I wanted to do, I would never be sitting here in that context of bullying someone. So we realized that people who got the opportunity to go to their destination wouldn't have time to sit down and create these, what we would call havoc circumstances for someone else. So we looked at that and saying, you know what? A part of this, even if things is missing out of your life, if we helped you to get to that destination that you would desire out of life, then that built up energy or built up emotion wouldn't be there now because you will be exercising it in something that you want to do with your life, which is why one of the reasons why so many people when they're dealing with the bully, they would actually have them play some type of sports because that's now excreting that aggression out of them. And it's the same thing. If you give someone a path of where they are destined to be and you have them exercise certain things on that path, then the aggression is going to come out. So when we looked at that, we were saying, you know what? That's one of the solutions, helping people to get to their destination. And when they're getting to their destination, they wouldn't have time to sit there to be a havoc for someone else. And this is normally categorized in that context of where they say hurt people, meaning that if you're not going to your destination, right, you would feel hurt. So you would now spend time getting that moment to hurt someone else who is not getting, who you're hoping not to get to their destination as well. And that would happen when someone goes into that mode of what is called suicide. All right. So that was something interesting that we found that if we allow the students or even other individuals to get to their destination, this was one of the solutions that we found practical. Another solution, which this is going to be the fifth one, that we found very, very interesting, right? Who knew that the context of words have power? So the moment you go out there and you're saying bully, bullying, bullying, and you're continuously saying it, you're giving it power to the universe. And that's the process of where you're now going to create it more and more. And when I found this out, that the universe doesn't look at, oh, it's a bad word or it's a good word. It's just looking at what word is being said. This is what I'm going to, what I would call multiply. So when we realize that the words that we use, they have power, what I did now was dismantle the word. And how we did this, we went to the process of where we were talking about the process when you write it down on paper, we would write it down in the context of this. B underscore LLY. And we did that because we knew that when you write things down, so when we did our flyers, right, they have power. The words that are on that flyer have power. So we would actually spell the context of it and extract the U. So you would actually see B underline underscore, right, LLY, which means we dismantled the word. So we didn't give it the power that it actually needs to now go out into the universe. And this is one thing that really, that was what caused me to really walk away from this process. Because I realized at that particular time, as much as I had good intentions to do it, the moment you begin to get up every day and you're calling that word bully or bullying, what you were doing, you were giving it life, because words have power. And it doesn't matter what word that you're utilizing, the longer you're speaking that word day by day, is the more power you're giving it into the universe for it to now be created and replicated in the circumstance that you're actually dealing with. So I found that fitting, and this is what I looked at. Most people aren't aware of that. So for me, it was like my intention was good, but when I spoke the word, I'm giving it the power for it to be created back in the universe. So guess what would happen every day that I got up? Every day that I got up, I would be intentionally going out there to help someone with this process, but the unintentional aspect kicked in as well because I was creating it. Therefore, day by day, I'm also giving it power to exist more than it's supposed to exist. So for us was looking at it, hey, let's dismantle the word, because no longer would you be saying bully or bullying, because you actually extracted the you. And we did that too because we were saying, who is it that we want to extract out of that circumstance? You, the letter. But it was in the context of saying YOU as well. So that was one thing that we saw that was very fitting, that it's not giving it power to exist in the universe. Um, the sixth thing that we saw was what we did with the ping pong. We made it transferable. So for you out there, if you're out there and you're dealing with something that you have no idea of what it is, right? Or how to dismantle it, or how to overcome it, what you want to do, you want to take that thing that you're dealing with and then transfer it into something that you understand. For me, understanding bullying to the next level, I understood the concept of ping pong. Like I grew up playing ping pong. So I understand the context of that. So I was able to transfer the bully concept into ping pong. And that made sense to me. And because that made sense to me now, I was able to now dismantle it. So this is one thing that I found fitting when you're dealing with something, some type of subject or some type of matter that's on your what is called the challenging table. One of the things that you could do is actually transfer it to something that you understand. And when you transfer to understand that thing now, what happens now, you're able to now help go into the process of what is called diffusing it, because you have a better understanding of it. So that was one of the things that we looked at. So that was the sixth thing that we looked at as solutions in what we were doing. The seventh thing, as I promised to give you seven steps in how to resolve this, the seventh thing that we were looking at was restore it. Remember, go back to the 18th century. 18th century. Bully was the context of a friend or lover. So if we restore it back to where we were saying this is a person that's a friend or lover, and not this person that is bad or evil or mean or no gangster. If we were able to now restore it back to that context of where this person is a friend or a lover. If this person is a friend or a lover, they're not going to go into that process where they're going to be excreting this negative thing on this person, because that's their friend or their lover. So that's one of the things that we looked at as well. How do we restore it? And in order for us to restore it now, we have to bring it back to its original state. So those were seven things that we found that were practical when we dealt with this issue. The reason why I no longer deal with it at this standpoint of where I'm day by day dealing with this is because of number four, destination. because I understood that if we can get people to their destination, especially when they're missing their physiological needs, it's like we now step up and help them to get where they need to get to. Just like in any circumstance where the parent's supposed to be there for the child to help the child to get to where they need to get to in life. Well, if the parent is not there, someone could step up and still help that person to get to that state. And I realize that now. So, in that context, now, as we looked at getting people to their destination, this actually ties into the airport. What does the airport do? It allows people to get safely to their destination. And that's how we're able to look at it now from the airport adventure, the runway, where we're saying we want to get people to their destination. So these were things that we looked at instead of spending time trying to help people in that negative context of where we're saying, oh, we're dealing with this day by day. We looked at it, hey, if we can get you to your destination, then you're not going to spend time doing these things that is causing a havoc for people. So that's how that actually plays out into the airport adventure. So hopefully you're out there and something that was said today really resonated with you. And this is one thing that I knew beyond the context of bullying. And this is how I was able to now take the concept. This is why I was saying number six, transferable, transfer it to something that you understood, right? So in that context, someone may be listening to this and say, oh, you know what? I've never been bullied. So it doesn't relate to them. And I'll show you how this is applicable to not only just the process of bullying, it's applicable to what's going on in society, right? So, real quick, I would like to share with you how this process, right, was now highlighted in other areas. For instance, going back in the 1800s, right, it was something that was what positive, and then it transitioned into the 21st century where it's something that's negative. And this has been done across the lines in so many other areas. So, one of the contexts that I was looking at, as I said, some people may be watching the show and say, oh, bullying has nothing to do with me. I've never been in that circumstance. And it's because you don't understand certain things that has been done out there for us to be in that same circumstance indirectly, even though we're not in it directly. And this is one of the things that is quite interesting that I found. So, ironically, within the last week, we have been having the technical issue. But what happened last week, it allowed me not to do the show where we were going to talk about the solutions, right? But it gave me the opportunity to be in a class and also to watch a documentary on a trip going somewhere. And I found it interesting that what the class was teaching and what the documentary was showing at that particular time, I found it fitting that wow, this is how this get plays out in other areas of society that most people may not understand. So they may look at it and saying, you know what, bullying doesn't apply to me. So let me just break it down in somewhere else that you can understand this. So there's a word that is called sin. And sin is typically associated with what is a person that's called a sinner. So, sometime last week, I was able to watch this documentary, um, which the person that was explaining everything, his name is Jordan Maxwell. And he was expressing that the word sin way back when, and he even advised anyone that was watching the documentary to go on YouTube or um, Google and Google it so you could actually see it for yourself. So, what he expressed that sin, as it is in today's society, as something negative, was never something negative back then. So when I looked at that, I was like, wow, that's quite interesting because that's the same thing with bullying, right? The bully was never someone that was negative back then. So, how does sin play into this? Because he expressed that sin was considered a moon god, right? Where back in the days, they used to worship this god. In that context, now they utilize what is called a lunar calendar. A lunar calendar back then is where it's referring to the calendar days, just like we have calendar days today. They were referring to the lunar calendar. So sin was a god that they actually what? They worship, and they worship it under what is called the lunar calendar. At some point, they decided to move away from the lunar calendar and go to what is called the solar calendar. And I'll get into that shortly. But just listen to this carefully. So, sin was the moon god that people worship back then, right? Sin also is, and this is things that he was explaining, sin is also in the word synagogue. So in America and different places, they spell synagogue with a Y. But in Israel, they spell it with a I, which S-I-N, right, which is the root word in synagogue. It meant temple of the moon god. So they were worshiping the context of saying that the synagogue was the worship place for the moon god. And this was done in what? Israel, right? Then he began to express about the context of how Moses went to the mountain, which is called the Sinai mountain. And he broke it down and said, look at the root word in Sinai, which is the concept of what? Sin. So this is where Moses went to the mountain, right? To get the 10 commandments. He went to the Sinai mountain. So you were looking at it from the context that he broke it down where he was saying sin was the God, right? And this is the God that Moses went to. AI was actually the name of the mountain. So they put it together and call it what is called Sinai Mountain, meaning that that's where Moses went to meet God to get the commandments. When I looked at that, I was like, wow, that's quite interesting. So you're telling me that a sinner back then was a person who worshiped the moon god? But in today's society, it's bullied upon us to say that a sinner is a person who is committing a negative act against God. So when you looked at that, I was like, wow, isn't that the same context? Because let's go to what is called the calendar, which we utilize today, which is called the solar calendar. So they moved away from where they worship the moon to now where they worship the sun. And he was explaining this, that this is why you have service on what? Sunday. So you moved away from the moon god, which the moon god is called sin, right? To now where you're worshiping the sun. And now we have what is called a solar calendar. So in order for people to now start to worship a solar calendar, right? They had to be bullied and told them that sin, the moon, the lunar calendar, right? Or the moon god was the devil. So when you're going in that context of committing a sin, you're saying you're a part of the devil, right? And recall this. The devil is always associated with what? Music. What do you do with music? You sing music. Isn't it funny that the root word in sing, S-I-N-G, is also what? S-I-N? So when I began to see these things, I was like, wow, isn't it funny that we're talking about bullying? Yes, but this was also done in this religious context. And it's not something that I came up with. I just was in the position last week in a class or watching this documentary and listening to this person expressing these things. And I was like, wow, that is so fitting for that context of what I'm talking about with bullying. So we went from the process of saying that we worship what is called a sin god to now in the context of where we're saying Sin is something negative, just as they connotate it today as bully is something negative. So it may not be something that you're directly involved with the process of bullying, but it's something that was translated from bullying and brought to your life in somewhere else. And for me, it's like you can actually go and research these things and you will see it for yourself as well. So it's something that he brought to our attention. And I was just right there in that moment where I was able to see it and making it applicable to what we're talking about now. And as a person who actually came from Jamaica, where I understood the concept of what is called football in Jamaica, football is the sport where you kick the ball with your foot. If you come over here to America, it's either called soccer or they make it into what is called football, the sport that you actually carry the ball with your hand. So you could actually see how that was transitioned as well from the way the world look at football to now when you come to America, you look at football as something different. That was done with the swastika sign as well. The original concept of the swastika sign was something positive. Hitler made it into something negative. So when you look at all these things now, you're looking at it that somewhere along the line, they were something that's positive. And also, you can also look at this. I just spoke about the religious world, right? Or the athletic world. You can also look at this as the academic world too, because the same thing was done with what? Education. If you go back to the history of education, it was around the concept of what the etymology word highlights, educo or educare, which means to bring something out of people. Today, we have a different type of education. It's more of a doctrinated concept where I'm putting these things inside of you, inside of you, inside of you. And you will grow up, and about 90% of those things you will never use. So when you look at that, that has been done across the field in so many different industry. And you go through the same process of bullying, but just in a different context. So I wanted to bring that on today's show to show you not only does, hey, we're talking about the context of bullying on this concept, we're also now relating it to show you how bullying is applied to different areas of your life. And you can actually go out and just do your research and see that a sinner back then was never a person who is in the 21st century today as someone who did evil. It was someone who worshiped the moon god based on the lunar calendar. And you can go and research these things and just don't take my word for it, right? So this was something that I found interesting that I would wanted to like, hey, you know what? Let's bring that to the runway and see how does that fit in the topic of what we were talking about. So that's it for today's show. Hopefully that you're out there and you got something out of this. We're gonna continue the topic on the series next week. So stay tuned. If you have questions, comments, feel free to reach out to us because it's something that we want to bring to society so we can actually help it to go to a whole new destination. And hopefully, we're doing that with the series that we're creating. So, in the meantime, be safe, stay healthy, and build new possibilities. God bless.